In the summer of 1944, as Allied forces advanced through the hedgerows of Normandy, a new fear began to spread among American and British tank crews. It had a name whispered with both awe and dread: the Tiger. The German Panzerkampfwagen 6. Tiger first appeared on the Eastern Front in 1942, but by the time of the Normandy campaign, its reputation had already reached legendary status. Reports from Soviet, British, and American units all describe the same thing: a tank so heavily armored and so powerfully armed that engaging it frontally seemed almost suicidal. The Tiger weighed around 57 tons, carried 100mm of frontal armor, and mounted the 88mm KWK-36 L-56 gun, derived from the feared Flak 1836 anti-aircraft weapon that had already earned a deadly reputation against both aircraft and tanks. Its armor could shrug off hits from the standard 75mm M3 gun of most American M4 Shermans, unless the Sherman managed a close-range side shot, a rare luxury in the tangled Norman countryside. By contrast, the M4 Sherman, the backbone of the Allied armored forces, weighed only 30 tons, had 51mm of frontal armor, and its gun was significantly weaker. In a one-on-one duel on open ground, the Sherman's chances were slim. And tank crews knew it. One British tanker later recalled, "If you saw a Tiger, you called artillery. You didn't duel it." This imbalance became the source of one of World War II's most enduring myths, that German tanks were vastly superior, and Allied victories came only through overwhelming numbers. But as with many legends born in war, the truth was more complicated. The first encounters between Shermans and Tigers in the West came not in Normandy, but earlier, in Tunisia, in February 1943, during the battles around Sidi Bou Ziyad and Kasserine Pass. The newly arrived American forces of the Second Corps faced the Heavy Panzer Battalion 501, equipped with the Tiger I. There, the Tiger's thick armor and long-range accuracy shocked the Americans, who were still using M3 Lee tanks alongside their early Shermans. The Germans, however, fielded only a handful of Tigers, fewer than 20 in the entire theater, while hundreds of Shermans poured into North Africa from U.S. factories each month. Even in this first meeting, the pattern was set. Tactical German superiority met strategic American abundance. By June 1944, when Operation Overlord began, the German army had fewer than 130 Tiger I tanks in France, divided among several heavy tank battalions, such as Heavy Panzer Battalion 101 under the Waffen-SS and 50 Batterie under the Wehrmacht. Against them stood thousands of Shermans, Cromwells, and Churchills, landing with the Allied invasion force. Yet the fear persisted. Allied crews called the experience of fighting Tigers Tiger phobia. Sometimes, even ordinary Panzer IVs were reported as Tigers, simply because of their intimidating silhouettes or the psychological pressure of facing unseen enemies in the bocage. On June 13, 1944, the small town of Villers-Bocage became the scene of one of the most famous Tiger actions of the war. The German ace Michael Wittmann, commanding a Tiger from the Heavy Panzer Battalion 101 of the Waffen-SS, ambushed elements of the British 7th Armored Division, destroying over a dozen vehicles in minutes. The event made headlines in Germany and further elevated the Tiger's mythical status, but what was often overlooked was what happened next. Wittmann's Tiger was eventually knocked out, and the German position at Villers-Bocage could not be held. The episode symbolized the entire contrast. One Tiger could dominate a moment, but not the campaign. For all its power, the Tiger had severe limitations. Its complex Maybach HL230 engine, heavy transmission, and overlapping road wheels made maintenance a nightmare. It consumed almost 500 liters of fuel per 100 kilometer, and in the fuel-starved Wehrmacht of 1944, this alone was crippling. Many Tigers were abandoned or destroyed by their own crews, simply because they ran out of fuel or broke down beyond recovery. In contrast, the Sherman could drive twice as far on the same amount of fuel, was easy to repair, and could be shipped across the Atlantic in large numbers. A damaged Sherman might return to battle within days. A disabled Tiger might never return at all. As the Allied advance continued after D-Day, statistics began to tell a story very different from the myth. Yes, a Tiger could destroy a Sherman at long range, but the Germans rarely had the luxury of choosing their engagements. They were on the defensive, facing overwhelming air superiority and artillery. A single Tiger, once spotted, could expect to be targeted by Jabo's Allied fighter bombers like the P-47 Thunderbolt within minutes. By late July 1944, during Operation Cobra, the American breakout from Normandy, the effectiveness of the Tiger was no longer in its gun or armor, but in its legend. It inspired fear, but fear could not stop logistics. The Allies could afford to lose tanks. The Germans could not afford to lose time. The myth of the invincible Tiger was, in many ways, created not by German propaganda alone, but by the men who faced it, Allied tankers who saw friends lost to its gunfire. To them, it was the embodiment of German engineering and battlefield terror. But the truth, and the reason the Allies ultimately prevailed, lay beyond the duel of armor and steel. It was hidden in the factories of Detroit, in the supply depots of Cherbourg, and in the endless convoys that kept the Shermans rolling. Because war, as 1944 proved, was not won by the best machine, but by the best system. The story of the Tiger and the Sherman was not only about armor and guns. It was the story of two nations and two industrial philosophies that could not have been more different. One built machines to perfection, the other built systems to win wars. Germany, by the late 1930s, was still a country of craftsmanship and precision engineering. Its industry produced masterpieces, cars, optics, and weapons built with meticulous attention to detail. Every tank was assembled almost by hand. Components often required individual fitting. Factories like Henschel and Sohn in Kassel and Porsche's design office in Stuttgart valued innovation and performance above ease of manufacture. The Tiger. I reflected this mentality completely. Each tank required more than 300,000 man-hours to produce 10 times that of a Sherman. The armor plates were thick, but machining them required heavy presses and skilled welders in short supply. Even its Maybach HL-230 engine was hand-tuned, powerful, but unreliable under field conditions. To German engineers, a tank was a technical challenge to be perfected, not a product to be standardized. That philosophy had its roots in interwar doctrine. Tanks were meant to support the blitzkrieg, where quality and tactical surprise mattered more than numbers. In 1941 and 1942, this logic made sense. A handful of German Panzer III and I-4 could destroy Soviet formations that were poorly commanded and disorganized. But as the war dragged on, the industrial balance shifted. The United States entered the conflict in December 1941 with a wartime economy already mobilizing on an unprecedented scale. In 1942, American factories produced 48,000 aircraft. By 1943, they produced more than 29,000 tanks and self-propelled guns. Detroit, Chicago, and Cleveland became the arsenal of democracy. Where Germany built machines of elegance, America built machines of endurance. The M4 Sherman was the embodiment of that philosophy. Designed in 1941 by the U.S. Ordnance Department, it was simple, standardized, and deliberately moderate in every specification. It used a Continental R975 radial engine, adapted from aircraft, a vertical volute spring suspension, and standardized parts that could be swapped across variants. It was not the most powerful tank in any single category, but it was the most reliable, easiest to produce, and simplest to repair. It could be welded, cast, or riveted depending on the factory. The same chassis could serve as a tank, a recovery vehicle, a self-propelled gun, or a command post. This flexibility allowed more than 49,000 Shermans to be built between 1942 and 1945 across companies like Chrysler, Ford, and American Locomotive. German production, by contrast, remained fragmented and inefficient. Even as Allied bombers destroyed factories, German engineers continued to introduce new, complex models: Tiger II, Jagdtiger, Panther, Elephant, each demanding unique parts and maintenance training. By 1944, the Wehrmacht was fielding over a dozen different tank and assault gun types, all requiring separate logistics. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, later admitted that this obsession with technological superiority cost Germany dearly. In his post-war memoirs, he wrote, "We had the best tank in the world." And that was our tragedy. The Tiger was indeed formidable. Its armor could resist nearly any Allied shell, and its 88mm gun could destroy a Sherman at over 1,500 meters. But its gearbox often failed after 500 kilometers. Its weight of 57 tons limited it to bridges that could bear its load, and transporting it by rail required special flat cars and disassembly of outer tracks. Meanwhile, the Sherman rolled off assembly lines like automobiles. In 1943 alone, the Detroit tank arsenal produced more than 1,000 per month. Crews could be trained in weeks, replacement parts shipped in crates, and damaged tanks rebuilt in forward workshops. The U.S. Army even standardized tools and manuals so that mechanics from one unit could repair any Sherman anywhere in the world. This difference was not just industrial, it was cultural. In Germany, the engineer was the master craftsman. In America, the engineer was a production manager. Germany sought the perfect weapon. America sought the repeatable process. By the time the Tiger entered large-scale combat in 1943, it was already a product of a losing strategy, a masterpiece built for a kind of war Germany could no longer afford. The Sherman, by contrast, represented an economy of scale that no Axis nation could match. When one Sherman was destroyed, 3 more could replace it within weeks. When a Tiger was lost, it might take months and scarce resources to build another. This divergence extended beyond the factory floor. The U.S. Army structured its entire doctrine around logistics, spare parts, recovery vehicles, fuel depots, and standardized ammunition. German divisions, constrained by shortages, often abandoned damaged tanks because they lacked towing equipment or spare engines. The historian Richard Overy later summarized the contrast succinctly. Germany built weapons for victory in 1940. America built weapons for victory in 1945. By the time the two philosophies met head-to-head in Normandy, the outcome was already set by economics and organization rather than steel and firepower. The Tiger could dominate a battlefield for hours. The Sherman could dominate a war for years. The difference between the Tiger and the Sherman was not simply industrial. It was doctrinal, born from how each nation understood what a tank was meant to do. For the German army, the tank was a tactical weapon, an instrument of decisive battle, a spearhead to punch through enemy lines or a mobile fortress to halt an advance. For the United States, the tank was a strategic tool, part of a broader system built on movement, logistics, and combined arms. This fundamental distinction shaped every design decision. The Tiger, precision and overmatch. When the Tiger I entered combat in late 1942, it represented the peak of German tank philosophy. Its 88 pinnacle 36 L56 gun could penetrate over 100 millimeters of armor at 1,000 meters. Its frontal armor, reaching 100 to 120 meters, could deflect nearly all Allied shells of the period. For comparison, the early Sherman's 75 meters gun could barely penetrate 80 of armor at close range. The Tiger was built for overmatch to engage and destroy at long distances, preferably before the enemy could respond. Its design aimed at battlefield dominance, not mass deployment. Inside, the Tiger was relatively spacious with excellent optics, the Zeiss TZF-9B sight giving gunners superb accuracy. Crews praised its stable gun platform and precise traverse system. In trained hands, a Tiger could hit moving targets at 1.5 kilometers, something few Allied tanks could dream of in 1943. But this excellence came at a cost. Its weight of 57 tons strained bridges and engines alike. Its Maybach HL230 P45 engine produced 700 horsepower, impressive on paper, but inadequate for such a massive vehicle. The result was frequent breakdowns. Each Tiger required several support trucks and specialized maintenance crews. Even simple tasks like changing a track link could take hours. German doctrine assumed that such elite machines would operate in independent heavy tank battalions, Schwer Panzerabteilungen, assigned to critical sectors. Each battalion fielded 45 Tigers, supported by recovery and repair units. In theory, they served as fire brigades, deployed to repel major Allied offensives. In practice, Germany could not sustain this model. Shortages of fuel, spare parts, and trained mechanics meant many battalions fought under strength. The Tiger's battlefield impact was often tactical brilliance, followed by strategic futility victories, measured in destroyed tanks but not in captured ground. The Sherman, mobility and coordination. The M4 Sherman, by contrast, reflected the American belief in mobility, reliability, and cooperation. The U.S. Army's 1941 armored doctrine, shaped by thinkers like Adna Chaffee and Jacob Devers, envisioned tanks not as lone hunters, but as part of a combined arms team: infantry, artillery, engineers, and air support. This philosophy stemmed from hard lessons in North Africa, where early American units suffered heavy losses at Kasserine Pass. By 1943, the U.S. Army had reorganized its armor around flexibility and speed. The Sherman was fast up to 40 km/h on road, far quicker than the Tiger. It was mechanically reliable and could operate for hundreds of kilometers without major servicing. Crews could refuel, repair, and rearm quickly. More importantly, it could be shipped, unloaded, and deployed anywhere from the deserts of Tunisia to the hedgerows of Normandy to the jungles of the Pacific. Its 75mm gun was not designed to duel enemy tanks. It was a multi-purpose weapon, optimized for high-explosive shells to destroy anti-tank guns, fortifications, and infantry positions, the true threats on most battlefields. Only later versions, like the M4A176W or the British Sherman Firefly with the 17-pounder, were adapted specifically for tank combat. To the Americans, the key was not to outgun the enemy's tank, but to outmaneuver his army. The doctrine emphasized the cooperation of armor with air power and artillery. When Shermans encountered Tigers or Panthers, they often used tactics that exploited numbers and coordination rather than direct confrontation, flanking attacks, ambushes, and artillery-guided strikes. A single Tiger might dominate a kilometer of open field, but an American armored division could cover dozens of kilometers with hundreds of Shermans, reconnaissance units, tank destroyers, and fighter bombers. The system, not the duel, decided the outcome. Doctrine meets reality. The contrast became clear in the summer of 1944. In Normandy, the hedgerows made long-range duels rare. Engagements occurred at ranges under 500 meters, where even the Tiger's long gun offered little advantage. In such conditions, the Sherman's faster turret traverse, better visibility, and radio coordination often proved more decisive. Meanwhile, the Tiger's logistical tail struggled. Its heavy tracks tore up rural roads, and the Wehrmacht lacked fuel to keep units mobile. Many were lost not to combat, but to breakdowns or air attacks while moving between fronts. The Sherman's lighter construction also proved an asset. Damaged tanks could be recovered, repaired, or cannibalized for parts. The Americans even introduced M32 recovery tanks and field maintenance depots, ensuring that a disabled Sherman might be back in action within days. By contrast, a single destroyed Tiger could represent weeks of lost industrial labor and scarce materials like molybdenum and nickel. Every Tiger lost was not just a tank destroyed, it was a symbol of the unsustainable burden of German engineering perfectionism. A clash of ideas. By 1944, these two philosophies collided head-on. The Tiger remained a deadly opponent, but the Sherman was a better soldier's tool, easier to maintain, easier to replace, and better integrated into the machinery of modern war. The United States could lose tanks and still advance. Germany could win individual battles and still retreat. In the end, doctrine and engineering merged into a single truth. The Sherman was never meant to beat the Tiger one-on-one. It was designed to win a war in which the Tiger could no longer afford to exist. The first real test between the Tiger and the Sherman came not in France, but in the sands of North Africa. In late 1942, after Operation Torch, American and British forces began advancing eastward into Tunisia. There, they met the Schwer Panzerabteilung 501, the first German heavy tank battalion equipped with the new Tiger 1. Tunisia, February 1943. The baptism of fire. On February 14, 1943, during the Battle of Sidi Bou Zid, elements of the U.S. Tri-the-New Corps encountered German Tiger tanks for the first time. The Americans fielded M3 Lee and early M4A1 Sherman tanks of the 1st Armored Division, commanded by General Lloyd Fredendall. Facing them were the experienced crews of the 10th Panzer Division and 501st Heavy Tank Battalion, under the overall command of Erwin Rommel. The encounter was disastrous for the Americans. The Tiger's 88mm gun destroyed Shermans at ranges where the American 75mm shells simply bounced off its armor. At Sidi Bou Zid and Kasserine Pass a few days later, dozens of U.S. tanks were knocked out. It was the first time American soldiers had faced German heavy armor, and it left a deep impression. But the tactical defeat hit a strategic lesson. The Americans quickly adapted, improving coordination between armor, artillery, and air power. The U.S. Army realized that tank versus tank combat was not its strength. Combined arms would be. By May 1943, the Axis forces in Tunisia surrendered. The Tigers of the 501st were either destroyed or abandoned. Out of the 20 Tigers shipped to North Africa, almost all were lost not in duels, but due to mechanical failure, lack of spare parts, or fuel shortages. Sicily and Italy, 1943 lessons learned. In July 1943, during the Allied invasion of Sicily, Operation Husky, Tigers reappeared with the Panzer Division Hermann Göring. The narrow roads and rugged terrain limited their use. Several were immobilized by broken transmissions or destroyed by air attacks while retreating. By the time the Allies landed on the Italian mainland in September 1943, the Tiger had gained a fearsome reputation, but its actual impact remained localized. American and British crews learned to counter it with artillery, airstrikes, and flanking tactics. The British introduced the Sherman Firefly, armed with the 17-pounder gun, which could penetrate a Tiger's frontal armor at close to 1,000 meters using APC-BC ammunition. It became one of the few Allied tanks capable of facing the Tiger on roughly equal terms. Normandy, June 1944. The return of the Tiger. When Allied forces landed in Normandy on June 6, 1944, the Germans had roughly 130 Tiger I tanks in France. These were divided among several elite units. The heavy SS Panzer Battalion 101, attached to the 1st SS Panzer Corps, commanded by Michael Wittmann and Heinz von Westernhagen. The heavy Panzer Battalion 503, under Fritz Herzig, operating near Caen and later around Falaise, and smaller contingents within Panzer Lehr and the 2nd SS Panzer Division, Das Reich. The first major clash came on June 13, 1944, near the small town of Villers-Bocage. That morning, the British 7th Armored Division, advancing toward Caen, ran into an ambush by a handful of Tigers from Wittmann's company. In minutes, Wittmann's Tiger destroyed more than a dozen British vehicles, including Cromwell's and half-tracks, before being forced to withdraw. The German propaganda machine immediately seized on the story. Wittmann became a national hero, and the Tiger's legend spread even further. But the victory was short-lived. The German counterattack failed to stop the British advance, and within weeks, Wittmann's own Tiger was destroyed during Operation Totalize on August 8, 1944, near Saint-Aignan-de-Cramonil. Allied reports credit a Canadian Sherman Firefly for the kill, though other sources suggest it might have been an airstrike. The Battle of Villers-Bocage became a symbol of what the Tiger could do, and also of what it could not. It could win moments, but not campaigns. Operation Goodwood and the Caen battles. In July 1944, during Operation Goodwood, the British launched a massive armored assault east of Caen, involving over 1,200 tanks. Opposing them were German forces, including the 503rd Heavy Tank Battalion and elements of the 21st Panzer Division. The Tigers inflicted severe losses on the British, especially at long range in open fields near Bourgabous Ridge. Yet, even here, numbers and logistics told. Allied artillery and fighter bombers systematically targeted German tank positions. Many Tigers were destroyed not by direct hits, but by the collapse of bridges, lack of fuel, or mechanical breakdowns during withdrawal. The German lines bent under the constant weight of supply and attrition, not under armor-piercing shells. Falaise Pocket, August 1944. The turning point. By August, the German army in Normandy was collapsing. During the Battle of the Falaise Pocket, August 12-21, 1944, remnants of the 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army tried to escape encirclement. The terrain, narrow roads, and muddy valleys was disastrous for heavy tanks. Dozens of Tigers and Panthers were abandoned or destroyed by their own crews to prevent capture. One striking image taken after the battle showed rows of burned-out Tigers along the road to Chambois, hulking symbols of a lost doctrine. They had fought hard, but they could not move fast enough to survive the collapse of the front. By the time the Allies liberated Paris on August 25, 1944, most of the Tigers committed to Normandy were gone. Their remains littered the French countryside, powerful machines rendered useless not by superior tanks, but by fuel shortages, Allied air dominance, and an enemy that refused to fight the Tiger on its terms. A pattern, set in steel. From Tunisia to Normandy, the pattern repeated itself again and again. The Tiger dominated at the tactical level in individual duels, ambushes, or defensive stands. But at the operational level, it was outmatched by an enemy whose strength lay in scale, supply, and adaptation. By the end of 1944, Germany had produced barely 347 Tiger 100 tanks, while the United States had built over 35,000 Shermans. No amount of armor or precision optics could offset that imbalance. The war of machines was, at its core, a war of systems, and every battle from the dunes of Kasserine to the hedgerows of Normandy proved that the Tiger's perfection was trapped inside an army that could no longer sustain it. Wars are not won only on the front lines. They are won or lost in the supply depots, the repair shops, and the endless convoys that feed an army's hunger for fuel, ammunition, and spare parts. In this invisible war, the Tiger was doomed long before it fired its first shot, and the Sherman had already secured its greatest victory, one of logistics. Factories, not front lines. By 1944, the industrial balance between Germany and the United States was staggering. That year, American factories produced 17 times more steel, 15 times more oil, and over 20 times more trucks than the Reich. The U.S. automotive industry, led by Chrysler's Detroit tank arsenal, was capable of assembling 1,000 Shermans per month and sending them anywhere in the world. In contrast, the German armaments industry was under constant pressure. Allied bombing campaigns like Operation Point Blank systematically targeted plants at Kassel, Wiener Neustadt, and Essen. Even when production recovered, distribution collapsed. Bridges, rail lines, and depots were destroyed faster than they could be repaired. A Tiger tank with its hand-fitted components and heavy armor required 3,000 man-hours in extensive machining. A Sherman could be built in about 3,000. That tenfold difference meant that even if Germany had the resources which it did not, it could never replace its losses at the same rate. Fuel, the true lifeblood. Every tank is a prisoner of its own fuel supply. The Tiger's Maybach HL230 P45 engine consumed around 500 liters per 100 kilometers, more than double that of a Sherman. By mid-1944, Germany's synthetic fuel plants at Leuna and Poelitz were bombed repeatedly, cutting output by over 80%. Without fuel, the Tiger's vaunted range and power were meaningless. Dozens were abandoned intact simply because they could not move. Crews sometimes destroyed their own tanks with explosives to prevent capture. The Sherman, meanwhile, drank deeply from an ocean of Allied logistics. The Red Ball Express, launched in August 1944, used over 6,000 trucks to transport fuel, ammunition, and spare parts from Normandy beaches to the advancing front lines, more than 12,000 tons of supplies per day. A single day's convoy carried enough gasoline to move thousands of tanks and vehicles. When Eisenhower called logistics the lifeblood of the Army, he meant systems like this, invisible, vast, and relentless. Maintenance and recovery. In combat, every tank eventually breaks. The difference is what happens next. German maintenance was centralized and limited. Heavy tanks required cranes, transporters, and workshops close to the front luxuries Germany no longer had by 1944. Spare transmissions and final drives were scarce. Even minor mechanical damage could sideline a Tiger for weeks. American doctrine treated maintenance as a forward operation. Every armored division carried its own ordnance battalions and M32 recovery vehicles, modified Shermans equipped with winches and cranes to tow and repair damaged tanks near the battlefield. Crews trained to perform emergency fixes in hours, not days. A U.S. Army report from September 1944 noted that a disabled tank is not a loss until the enemy occupies it. This mindset allowed the Americans to recover up to 60% of damaged Shermans during major operations. In contrast, German recovery rates for heavy armor often fell below 20% by late 1944 due to air attacks and retreat conditions. Interchangeability and standardization. The Sherman's greatest advantage was not in its armor, but in its interchangeability. Parts made in different factories could fit together perfectly. An engine built by Ford could power a tank assembled by Chrysler. Bolts, filters, optics, even radios all followed standard specifications. This meant that field depots could cannibalize damaged tanks to repair others without complex machining. Mechanics carried universal toolkits. Manuals were identical across divisions. If a transmission failed, it could be swapped in hours. The Tiger, by contrast, was built almost like a luxury car. Each gearbox and suspension system required careful fitting. Even different production batches had small variations. As a result, the German army could not simply mix and match parts from damaged vehicles. In the words of one U.S. ordnance officer after the war, the Sherman was a machine made to be fixed by men. The Tiger was a machine that needed its factory. Transportation and mobility. Logistics is not only about supplies, it's about movement. The Tiger's sheer weight made movement a constant problem. Its 57 tons exceeded the capacity of most European bridges. To transport it by rail, crews had to remove the outer set of its interleaved road wheels and use special narrow transport tracks, a process that could take several hours. When time was critical, these procedures became fatal delays. The Sherman, weighing around 30 tons, could cross most bridges, fit standard railway flat cars, and be loaded onto landing ships without modification. It could move across terrain that bogged down heavier vehicles, and its operational range up to 160 kilometers on full fuel gave commanders flexibility the Germans could only envy. Repair, return, replace. The American system turned logistics into a weapon. In Normandy and beyond, mobile repair units set up forward maintenance areas where damaged Shermans were triaged like wounded soldiers. Some were repaired within 48 hours and sent back into battle. Those too damaged were stripped for parts, nothing wasted. In the summer of 1944 alone, the U.S. Army repaired and returned over 2,000 tanks to service in the European theater. This constant replenishment meant that American armored divisions often entered battle with nearly full strength, even after weeks of fighting. German units, meanwhile, shrank with every engagement. In July 1944, Schwer Panzerabteilung 503 reported just 19 operational Tigers out of its authorized 45. By September, many heavy battalions existed only on paper. The numbers told a simple truth. The Allies could lose tanks and keep fighting. Germany could not. The hidden victory. When historians later examined why the Western Allies advanced so rapidly from Normandy to the Rhine, the answer was not just tactics or technology. It was logistics. Behind every Sherman stood 1,000 unseen workers welders in Detroit, sailors on Liberty ships, truck drivers on the Red Ball Express, mechanics in field depots. The Tiger might dominate a field for an hour. The Sherman could dominate a continent for a year, because in modern war, the real battlefield is not where shells fall, it is the one that keeps the shells and the tanks coming. Few machines of the Second World War generated as many myths as the Tiger and the Sherman. For decades, documentaries, war memoirs, and even Hollywood films painted a simple picture. The Tiger as an indestructible monster, the Sherman as a mass-produced coffin. Reality was far more nuanced. Myth 1. One Tiger was worth 10 Shermans. This claim appeared after the war, often based on anecdote. In truth, German records from 1944 show an average kill ratio of about 2 to 1, not 10. In specific duels, yes, a Tiger could destroy multiple Shermans before being knocked out. But when analyzed across entire operations, the advantage shrank rapidly once air power, artillery, and logistics entered the equation. By late 1944, the Allies were destroying more German tanks per month than Germany could build in total. Myth 2. The Sherman was a death trap. The nickname Ronson, Light's first time, came from early British crews who fought before the adoption of wet ammunition stowage. After mid-1944, when new wet racks surrounded shells with a water glycol mixture, internal fires dropped by more than 60%. Statistically, Sherman crews had similar or better survival rates than German tankers because Allied recovery and medical systems could reach the battlefield faster. A burning Tiger often trapped its 5-man crew inside heavy hatches. A Sherman's lighter build sometimes saved lives. Myth 3. The Tiger was invincible. The Tiger was feared, not immortal. Reports from Normandy, June 1944, show that roughly half of all Tiger losses came from breakdowns or abandonment, not enemy fire. When immobilized, they were easy targets for artillery or rocket-firing aircraft such as the Typhoon and P-47 Thunderbolt. In the confined terrain of the bocage, the Tiger's long gun and weight became liabilities rather than strengths. Myth 4. The Allies won only by numbers. Numbers mattered, but they worked because the system behind them functioned flawlessly. Quantity without logistics is chaos. Quantity with organization becomes power. Allied command could replace losses, rotate crews, and coordinate armor with air support. Germany, cut off from fuel and raw materials, could not. By spring 1945, the Wehrmacht had over 3,000 tanks immobilized for lack of gasoline alone. Myth 5. The Tiger was the best tank of the war. Best depends on context. The Tiger's armor and gun were unmatched in 1943, but its reliability, cost, and production time made it strategically inferior. When the war ended, it had become an evolutionary dead end too expensive for mass warfare. The Sherman, meanwhile, continued to serve in Korea, the Middle East, and even into the 1970s, precisely because it was easy to modernize. The balance of truth. The Tiger embodied Germany's engineering genius and its fatal obsession with perfection. The Sherman embodied America's pragmatism, a willingness to trade elegance for reliability. The myth favored the Tiger because it looked and sounded heroic. History favored the Sherman because it kept coming back. When the guns fell silent in May 1945, the wrecks scattered across Europe told the story better than any report. Burned-out Tigers lay stranded on muddy roads from Normandy to Berlin, magnificent, terrifying, and utterly defeated. Shermans rolled past them, dented and scarred, but still moving. The Tiger had been a masterpiece of engineering, a weapon built to dominate battlefields. Its armor could resist nearly anything. Its gun could destroy almost any target it faced. But it was a masterpiece built for the wrong kind of war. The Sherman, by contrast, was never meant to be perfect. It was designed to be good enough to build by the tens of thousands, simple enough to repair in a field workshop, light enough to cross bridges, and versatile enough to fight on every continent. It was not a duelist's tank. It was a soldier's tank. The lesson was as old as war itself. A weapon is only as powerful as the system that supports it. Germany built for superiority. America built for sustainability. And in the end, sustainability won. When the Reich collapsed, so did its machines. When the war ended, The Shermans kept rolling through France, across the Rhine, into the Cold War, and far beyond. The Tiger became a museum piece, a monument to brilliance trapped in isolation. The Sherman became a symbol of endurance, proof that quantity, when guided by purpose, can defeat perfection without compromise. Because wars are not won by the strongest machine, but by the machine that never stops coming.